Hey guys, it's Danny. Today I am going to make a sort of a rating of what I find to be the easiest orchids, gradually going to the most finicky or most difficult. I will consider the vast majority of the more popular orchids, let's say, definitely the ones in flower shops, but also some of the ones in specialized nurseries. This video will be slightly subjective because I'm talking out of my own experience, but I did grow my orchids in 2 different types of climates. I will try to put myself in more people's shoes, let's say, and come up with a pretty good list that I hope will help most of you home growers. And before we start, don't forget to give this video a like if you end up enjoying it. It really helps it out, and why not subscribe? I post multiple times a week. Right, let's start. The first orchid, which I consider to be the easiest to keep in a home, it's not the Phalaenopsis. It is, though, ta-da, the slipper orchid. Not any slipper, the Paphiopedilum. Phragmipiniums, different type of orchid, which I will not address today because I really don't have good luck with them. But Paphiopedilums, in my opinion, are the most hassle-free orchid for home growers. Some might disagree, some might say no, Phalaenopsis is, but I have some reasons to believe that, again, generally speaking, these guys will not give you as many headaches. The first concept to grasp whenever we're growing most other orchids which are epiphytic is the fact that they are epiphytic, they will not behave like other houseplants. Well, the Paphiopedilum is terrestrial, so it will actually be a little bit more similar to the other houseplant we might already grow. I would say it is the in-between nice transitional plant, because this guy doesn't really like to dry out. So it is much more forgiving to more frequent watering, to, let's say, more of a denser substrate. This is not the type of orchid to put out aerial roots, and most of the times you won't even find it for purchase in transparent pots. So first off, I really don't think it's as intimidating as your first Phalaenopsis might be, with all the transparent pots and roots everywhere. Second, when it comes to care requirements, it doesn't really ask for much. It doesn't even ask for bright light. Temperature-wise, it is comfortable in a wide range of temperatures, most of them being absolute normal home temperatures. Doesn't need high humidity, doesn't need a drop of temperature to trick it into blooming. And while it can still suffer from rot, it is a sympodial, so it might actually bounce back with a new growth. Bonus, it looks so pretty. Yes, it's not gonna be in bloom for as long as the Phalaenopsis, not gonna have all that beautiful spray of flowers, but I do believe overall, considering all of the things that I know and experienced with slipper orchids, I think they're the easiest, least intimidating, and most rewarding if you just want a plant that looks nice, because look how nice it is, blooms from time to time. It's gonna grow well in even office lighting situations. Not to mention they are quite resilient. Yes, they don't really like to dry out, but I don't know if you noticed, mine is very dry. I'm late with watering day. It has been a busy week. Do you see him wilting? No. Do you see the flower fading? No. So yeah, he doesn't like drought much, but if you just have a busy day, if you postpone watering a day or two, he's just not gonna mind it. He's gonna completely understand you. And for that reason, I really love slippers. I really do. I find them easier than Phalaenopsis. Orchid number 2, the Phalaenopsis. Even though, yes, it has its soft spots and sensitivities, but you know what? Throughout the years, anywhere that I lived, I have been more consistent with Phalaenopsis success than any other thing. And you might already know Phalaenopsis are the most popular orchids, and that's for a reason. Now, Phalaenopsis are epiphytic orchids, so the thing you need to get used to the most is the fact that they don't like to have roots that suffocate. They need a different type of potting mix, maybe a different type of pot, a transparent pot. They will teach you patience, because in order to rebloom them, you need to be patient, you need to grow them vegetatively. You might do a few mistakes along the way, like rotting the roots, rotting the crown or the stem. Yeah, there are all of those things happening. But with other orchids, I feel like there are worse things that can happen easier for home growers. They're also available in most countries around the world in flower shops and garden centers, and again, in most countries they are very affordable as well. But what I believe is one of the major drawbacks of these orchids is that they have a little bit of a trick when it comes to reblooming. So especially for those of you who live in very warm climates and have some issues reblooming Phalaenopsis, I do have the beautiful polychilous type Phalaenopsis or hybrid, which is much easier to rebloom. To better explain this, I have a video that I filmed recently. Check it down below in the description. Bottom line, I do believe there is a Phalaenopsis for everyone. Now, if you did not have success with Phalaenopsis, there is something in your care or maybe environment that messes stuff up for you, because really phals are really forgiving. So try to figure out what messes up your plants, because I'm sure if you eliminate it, you're not gonna have issues with Phalaenopsis. And even though historically I wasn't really a big fan of Phalaenopsis, I will tell you I love miniature Phalaenopsis because they don't take up space and they give me the same beautiful flowers, just on a tinier version. And I also adore the Polychilus types, the Polychilus hybrids, novelty hybrids, all of those things. This thing right here, I adore it, and it doesn't give me headaches quite at all. So honestly, I'd rather focus on something like this than trying out Miltoniopsis again and failing again, you know? So these guys are my babies, and I would recommend them to anybody. Orchid number 3, Cattleya Orchids, some of my favorites. These orchids have regained some of their lost popularity, I feel like, in the past few years. Did you know these guys were super popular maybe in the 40s? When the flowers were used as corsages, they were the Phalaenopsis of their time, really. And well, with the availability and diversity of Phalaenopsis, they kind of lost some of that popularity, but it's back because Cattleyas are absolutely fantastic. There are so many different types of Cattleyas and hybrids on the market nowadays that you can find something to suit you. If you want fragrant, you're gonna find fragrant. If you want non-fragrant, obviously you're gonna find non-fragrant hybrids. Whatever color you can think of, minus maybe black, you can find a Cattleya with that color. I would love a black Cattleya. Bonus, they are sympodial orchids. They are not prone to crown rot or stem rot. They have other soft spots, but certainly I do believe it's easier to rebounce a Cattleya which has a rhizome rather than a monopodial. The downside of these guys is that there are so many different varieties that you don't know what you're gonna get pretty much. The hybrids are more likely to bloom more for you and grow faster, but there are some species which have terribly slow growth, species which you kind of need to time a repot of because of their very strict pattern of growth. If the Cattleya skips blooming this year, then it's goodbye until next year. You know, there's no other possibility of it blooming this year. It can be a little frustrating with the species and maybe simple hybrids. But they're also more drought tolerant. These guys are very suited for very hot climates. As long as you have bright light, whether artificial or natural, you should be good with these guys. And really honestly, I don't think there is an orchid that can compete with the fragrance of Cattleyas generally. Not even Phalaenopsis, and I love my Bellina. No, this is beautiful. I love my Chantilly. So the Cattleya is 3rd on my list. No surprise there. 4th orchid, and I'm pretty sure I'm gonna stop counting at this point. I don't have it here, but I would put the Dendrobium Phalaenopsis type orchid. And this is because, to me, it is another version of a Cattleya that looks a little different, and obviously it's a completely different genus, but I feel like the care for Cattleyas is identical to the care of Dendrobium Phalaenopsis types. And in some parts of the world, they are so incredibly popular, especially in Asia and maybe in Central America. Am I wrong? Let me know. I feel like those climates are very suited for these orchids. They are hot growers, they like a lot of light, they are very drought tolerant. I don't know which is more tolerant, the Dendrobium Phalaenopsis or the Cattleya, but I can assure you that denphals don't necessarily need to be repotted at a certain time of the year. I rarely ever lost a Dendrobium Phalaenopsis. So I was tempted to put them above Cattleyas on the list, but I won't, simply because there isn't as much variety as the Cattleyas. With the Cattleyas, you can find tiny little specimens for smaller homes, smaller shelves, smaller offices. With Dendrobium Phalaenopsis types, it's typically you go big, you go tall. There are very few which are actually tiny, and certainly they're not as tiny as tiny Cattleyas. So I find generally Cattleyas a bit more versatile when it comes to maintenance, but other than that, I find Dendrobium Phalaenopsis just as easy and just as much of a joy to grow them. You might have some issues with blooming them if you don't have a lot of light, but the story is the same with Cattleyas as well. Anyway, to me, they're pretty much on the same level. One of them though is much more diverse than the other, so that's why I put Cattleyas in front of Denphals. Next up, we're gonna go more into the territory of nursery orchids, the Bulbophyllums. I love Bulbophyllums. I will get more, but the fact that they're not available at the flower shop obviously means I'm not gonna acquire them as fast. But Bulbophyllums, in my eyes, are just as easy to grow as Phalaenopsis. They don't require a lot of light, they don't require special conditions. You can grow them out of a greenhouse, just like all of these orchids. I mainly specialize in home approved orchids. So things that need a lot of humidity and all sorts of special things that you cannot implement in a home, you will not find in this video. To me, Bulbophyllums are the thirstier version of the Phalaenopsis, if you will. At the same time though, they don't tend to bloom as often and as long-lasting as Phalaenopsis. They don't necessarily have the most interesting leaves either, and certainly they can grow out of hand because they are a crawling type of an orchid. It is a sympodial and it has quite a long rhizome. There are exceptions obviously, but the ones that I have, they're naughty. They tend to spread really fast. So that is a drawback. Plus, the fact that you don't see it in bloom all that often, again, is a drawback. Plus, some of them smell really bad, like really bad. Their pollinators are flies, you can imagine. But they're just so beautiful and so easy to take care of once you get the hang of things. They're just not as easy to bounce back. In my experience, all of the Bulbophyllums that I ever lost, except one, which I think had a virus, but all the others, I lost them because they had a rough transport or they weren't very healthy to begin with, and rehabilitating them, it was not easy. So that's the only drawback that I see with bulbos. They're quite sensitive when it comes to almost losing them, but other than that, once they get going, look at this guy. They're really easy to grow, they don't require a lot of light, but they don't bloom as often either. However, I just find them a joy to grow in a home. Next up, it's gotta be Vandas for me. Oh man, Vandas. I think I'm on a mission to popularize Vandas together with the Bulbophyllums. I understand why they're not as popular as Phals. But don't they look like another type of Phalaenopsis? Kinda, right? Well, Vandas, I believe, are not as popular because they are sold bare-rooted, and it's a little bit intimidating. If you think Phalaenopsis are intimidating because they're potted in transparent pots and they have roots everywhere, imagine a bare-rooted Vanda. Yeah, it is intimidating, and it is quite large. But on the market, in nurseries, there are tiny Vandas available as well. And if you manage to acclimate them to pot culture, it's gonna be much easier to take care of something like this in a home. I do have a video on Vanda care, just like any other orchid, down below, but I also have a video on how I like to switch them to pots. It's not an easy process, depending where you purchase your orchid. Sometimes from some nurseries, I did get already potted Vandas, but it was kind of rare. But the market is changing. If you get a Vanda acclimated to a pot, great. I don't think it's way different than a Phalaenopsis. Yes, it does require much more light, and yes, it is a hot grower, but it doesn't need that cool down to bloom, and it can also stay pretty small if you choose a variety that stays small. But for me, Vandas are high up because I did manage to adjust all of my Vandas to pot culture, and I have a great time with keeping them like that in my home. So definitely give Vandas a chance because I think they are beautiful. Next up on the list is jewel orchids. Now, I would put the Ludicea discolor further up in my list, maybe as close as Phalaenopsis, but I will keep it here because Ludicea is not the only jewel orchid we can grow, and other jewel orchids are just a little bit more finicky, slower growing, not as friendly, quite intimidating. So because Ludiceas and its hybrids are so easy to grow, they don't demand a lot of light, they just grow in whatever type of soil you have. For that reason, they are here. But other orchids might demand a little bit of a higher humidity to grow well, although they can grow well in a home as well. But I don't know if you have a very dry home. If you struggle with humidity, you might struggle with some of these guys. So it's hard to generalize. Ludicea discolor is easy, and I do believe it will do pretty good in almost any type of home, but because there are some individuals that really don't like certain environments, I'm just gonna keep it here. I have a tutorial that I recently made on jewel orchids and Ludiceas. It's hard to generalize. I might think that maybe the Makotas will be difficult for some of you, but turns out it's not. I might say, oh, this is super easy to grow, but you might not have such good success with it. It really depends on environment. So I'm not gonna put it high on the list, I'm gonna put it in the middle. I consider it to be easy, but I can see how some people can struggle with some individuals of this particular family. Next up, Tolumnia Orchids. Again, I feel they're not as popular as they should be because they're not all that available in flower shops across the world. But Tolumnias, I believe they're great for home growing because they're rather tiny. And look at this flower display. Typically on Tolumnias, you'll have bigger flower displays than the orchids themselves. The flowers look like Oncidium flowers. They're not fragrant typically, but they are just so charming. And a Tolumnia can bloom multiple times a year. You don't need to drop the temperature or anything. You don't need high humidity. Again, you don't need greenhouse conditions to grow these guys. Where I think the downfall is with Tolumnias is getting the mixture right. These like moisture, but they like air just as much. So with your mixture, you need to strike a balance between having a lot of aeration and keeping them hydrated. I don't feel like Tolumnias are drought tolerant. Whenever I skip watering day, I start to see little wrinkles, so I need to water. But if I make too much of a wet, let's say, mixture, too much sphagnum moss, that's not really to their liking. They grow much better when I offer a lot of ventilation and a lot of moisture at the same time. So it can be a little tricky to find the proper mix, but once you do, I don't think you're gonna have a lot of issues. Another thing that they're not great at is bouncing back fast. A setback Tolumnia can definitely bounce back, but it's gonna take a while. All of mine that were in bad shape due to, I don't know, transport, root loss, bad repotting, and things of the sorts, they took a while to bounce back. A while. For a tiny little orchid, you think, it's gonna come back to its full glory within the year. Not really. No. It takes a while. You'd think, that it will bounce back fast because it has fleshy leaves, it has reserves. No, it takes a long time. I don't know why. But once it gets going, it's great. So because of the reward and the very little space they take, I will put Tolumnia somewhere in the middle of my chart. Next up, I'm going to place on the list Dendrobiums, generally speaking, except the Nobiles. Nobiles are further down. But Dendrobiums are just such a varied group of orchids, it's just hard to split them in all sorts of sections. So I'm just gonna bunch all of the Dendrobiums together at this stage of my list because there are some which are more finicky than others, some that are not really finicky at all, easy to grow in a home, but they're pest collectors. Generally, Dendrobiums are known for really attracting pests, which is not a good sign. Some Dendrobiums do take a little bit of a winter rest, but it's not like the Phalaenopsis. You don't necessarily need to drop temperatures, in my opinion, again, except the Nobiles. Some are deciduous. I'm not sure how many people like to have bare canes in the middle of winter with nothing on them, and just to wait for a once-a-year show, maybe not what you would want. Some Dendrobiums are big, some are absolutely worth it and easy to grow, like the Baryota. I think it's very easy to grow. Some are just not very easy to grow. So because they're just so varied, you kind of need to pick which one you think will do okay for you, which one you have more available in your area. But generally speaking, I find Dendrobiums to be somewhat on the lower side. They're not the most finicky orchids for me generally, but they're not the most glorious either. I mean, my fowls and my cats are glorious, not these guys, but I do okay with some of them. So that's why you don't see a lot of Dendrobiums on my channel. I'm not a fan of stuff that are just not happy with my face. If they don't like me, I don't want to keep them here by force. So I don't have a lot of them, and the ones that I do, I really like, or I think they will do okay in my environment. So for me, Dendrobiums are here on the list, bottom of the list, but not the most bottom position. Dendrobium nobilis, on the other hand, oh boy, where do I start? If I would be living back in Romania in a temperate climate, I would say Dendrobium nobilis are easy, rewarding, beautiful plants. But now that I live in this subtropical climate, I cannot. They have such a specific pattern of growth that I don't get it right. Mid-season, winter comes, they're midway through their growth, the second growth, because yes, they grow 2 growths in my environment because I have long summers. And then they just end up depleting themselves, trying to figure out what type of season it is, what they should do, should they bloom, should they not, all of that drama, I talked about it. It's not worth it. So with Dendrobium nobilis, on my personal list, they're low, but on other people's lists, they might be higher up, because if you have that particular climate that helps them out, it's great, it's fantastic. They're beautiful, they smell nice, you should definitely own them. They're not finicky at all, they can grow in a home. You just need to pay attention to the winter rest, and other than that, they should be absolutely fine. And for the time that I grew them in Romania, I had no issues. No issues, they were the easiest. Well, things don't sit the same way here. So for me personally, they're low on my list. I don't even bother purchasing them anymore. I don't know if I will ever purchase them. If I have one, maybe I'm gonna get it for a video or for an experiment, but I don't want to lie to myself. I can't grow these guys anymore. And that is that. All right, are we ready for the bottom of the chart? Yes. Oncidiums. I can't believe I'm putting them on the bottom because I love them, but oh man, considering the last year that I had with them and how many I lost due to the pest infestation, I can't. So, Oncidiums generally are easy to keep. They are not very demanding. You can grow them in a home. They have been the first serious, let's say, orchids that I managed to save. I kind of built my foundation knowledge of orchids on Oncidiums because I purchased a lot of them discounted, dirt cheap, like 9 years ago or 10 years ago. So I built my channel and I built my knowledge on Oncidiums. I know a lot about them. This being said, when it rains, it pours with them. When things go bad, oh man, they roll so fast if you don't have time for them. So these guys should be really easy for a home grower. If you don't have a lot of orchids, they will be very easy. But if you have a lot of orchids, maintaining these guys will be a nightmare. It has been for me. I am definitely never going to purchase as many Oncidiums unless I have a contingency plan. What happens is, because they have these growths, which are kind of like an onion, they have a lot of layers, and because they have big leaves, I'm showing you a tiny one by the way, there are others that are big, they have a lot of leaves. They're very foliage oriented plants. They have leaves, they have pseudobulbs, they have large structures. It's easy to contain a pest outbreak. You might contain it on the surface. You're gonna break your bag, it's gonna take a while if you're not using, let's say, toxic systemic means. If you're using spot treatment, let's say oil-based solutions, it's gonna take an eternity, it's gonna break your back, and you're not gonna achieve success necessarily because, oh, look at that, the pest might hide themselves in the new growth. Can you do anything about it? No, because if you put water in the new growth, it's probably going to rot. Can you oil it really bad? No, because the new growth is pretty tender and you're gonna rot it again. It's not a pretty situation if you let a pest outbreak get out of hands. And with Oncidiums, it's really easy to do so. Whenever we grow orchids, we need to be a little realistic. Yes, we have time for everything now, but there might be a time in our life when we need to focus on very important stuff and neglect some parts of our lives which are not all that important. It's not because we want to, it's because we are forced to, right? So this is the reality of things. The first ones to be affected by neglect, I think, will be Oncidiums or Oncidium types. I'm gonna include here the Miltoniopsis as well, Miltonias, Brassias, even Zygos. I'm gonna include them as well. All of these guys, I think they will take the hit in your collection. And when it comes to rehabilitating them from a pest infestation, it's gonna be a long, hard process. That has been my experience with them. And it's sad because I love them so much. I think they are so rewarding. If they're good, they're wonderful. If you don't have issues with them, they grow wonderfully. But if you don't have time for them, they can really go downhill fast and make your life really, I'm not gonna say bad. Orchids don't make my life bad, but just not fun, you know? So sadly for me, Oncidiums, which are some of the orchids I owe everything I have to, honestly, they are at the bottom of my list. It's heartbreaking, but that's the truth. That's how things evolve. So if I'm ever going to have a bigger Oncidium collection, I will try to focus on tinier individuals, stuff that I can contain, or maybe that I can grow in one of my glass cabinets, which maintains them pest-free or close to pest-free, easy to manage, right? Other than that, I don't know. I don't see myself going through the drama anymore. So sadly, they are on the bottom of my list. But what about you guys? What is your list? Do you have something that you would put at the bottom of my list that I put on top? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know why. I'm curious to hear from you. And with that said, thank you so much for watching this video. Hope it was entertaining, or maybe you learned something new. You're gonna have tutorials, actual beginner care tutorials for these orchids down below in the description as always. And with that said, if you'd like to keep in touch with me on social media, just search for me. I'm at MissOrchidGirl. Most importantly though, subscribe to this channel because I post very, very frequently every week here, multiple times a week. And with that said, I hope you have a great day and I'll see you next time. Bye.